Okay.
Okay, so the purpose of this session is just to get everyone up to speed ahead of um ahead of the pitches with the investors, which is going to be the whole of the next 4 sessions, just to cover some of the questions that came up in the chat. So when you're pitching, we'll give you 3 minutes. So similar to what you might have seen with Stephen when he did about half an hour of pitch feedback, and we did a little bit ourselves. We'll give you 3 minutes. We do keep quite tight on time. So if you go over 3 minutes, we will stop you. So do try and keep your deck to 3 minutes if you can. And then after that, we'll pass over to the investor who'll have 2 to 3 minutes to provide some feedback. They've all been given the same brief, which is that it's essentially like, just tell us what's going on in your head, and what you're thinking. So if you like it, great. If you think the total addressable market is too small, or you don't understand the problem, or the solution doesn't align with the problem, just kind of give us an insight, because it's really helpful. For the founders that aren't going to be pitching, it's honestly so valuable listening to the feedback that the investor provides to the founders that are pitching, because often it's applicable to you, even though it's not your business, because it might be about the market size or how you're communicating the competition or how the deck looks or something like that, which other founders can apply. We'll make sure that everybody gets a fair chance of being able to pitch. So if you did pitch to David on Wednesday and then you put your hand up on Monday, we'll make sure that people that haven't pitched yet get an opportunity to pitch. So we're not going to promise that every single founder can pitch at every single session. Saying that, it is by you volunteer to pitch. So if you also don't think that you're ready, we're not going to force you to start pitching in front of investors at this point. So if you do want to join just to watch, that's totally fine as well. So if there are only 6 or 7 people that are volunteering every single week, we'll probably be able to get through everyone. The only investor I probably point out is Cambridge Angels. So they will provide live pitch feedback, but they're slightly more interested in health tech or med tech. So if we do have any health tech or med tech startups, we will prioritize those for that angel syndicate. Everybody else is completely agnostic. So any founder can pitch to any angel. David Levine is from Manchester Angels, but doesn't just invest in Manchester-based companies. He'll also invest in companies that are referred to him by a trusted partner, of which Hotbed is considered one. Same with Southeast Angels. They invest in Southeast, but they also invest in London. And if there are other startups outside of the Southeast or London region, but they're recommended by a trusted partner, they'll look into that deal as well. So don't get too kind of taken aback by the geographical location mentioned in that Angels syndicate name. The purpose of this is just to get everyone up to speed. Obviously, people are at different stages with their deck. The first few slides are fairly obvious, but we just want to set the scene before we get into the kind of narrative flow of what we would expect to see on the pitch deck. Some people have done pitching before, or maybe had a pre-seed deck that looks similar. So just bear with us for the first few slides whilst we set the scene, and then we'll get into it. And some of this would have come up before as well. So there's psychology in pitching and storytelling and narrative building. And one of the main things that we hear from investors is that the founder is trying to communicate absolutely everything that the business does on their deck. And it gets really confusing if you're hearing all of this for the very first time. So you need to figure out what the thing is that you want to say. So if the average human person can only remember 7 pieces of information in their working memory at any time, what are the 7 key things that you want an investor to remember when they look at your deck? And most businesses that we see who are pitching, they're not trying to communicate 7 things, they're trying to communicate like 50 things. So this is what we want to get people to the stage of. Oh, wait, there you go.
Right. So that's why slides like this do not work. Also, bear in mind, of the 7 things people can have like their working memory at any time, probably 3 or 4 of those are about their own life, if not all 7. So there's things already in people's minds that you are competing with. So there's probably only like maybe 1 or 2 spaces for you to take up of the 7. So that's why these slides, especially at the start of your deck, when you're trying to captivate people, really do not work. I'll also highlight that everything that we're about to share in this presentation is heavily shaped by the feedback that we see founders getting in the pitch sessions that we run. And also outside of the pitch sessions, Perdie and I have now seen literally thousands of decks. And so we want to have the sessions so you guys know the common things that come up from investors and then the common kind of traps we see people fall into when they're designing their deck and when they're practicing the pitch. So a slide like this, as I'm sure you guys can see, if you are spending, let's say, 10 seconds on this prompt side, we know the average investor only takes 150 seconds to go through your entire deck. So let's say they have about 10 to 20 seconds on the slide. There's not a clear takeaway. We're going to get into why a clear takeaway matters so much. But this is what many slides look like. And there's so many color shapes, you don't know where to look like, you don't know where to look at. And whatever you're trying to say gets lost.
Does anyone want to like take themselves off mute and say what they think the main problem is with this slide, in their opinion, if they were looking at it?
I personally say there's just way too much information. Even I feel overwhelmed just looking at it.
Yeah. And this is slides that we've seen like a whole bunch of times. And some of the things that are, let me just check whether I don't know. I went through like a bunch of different slides, but I got them. So one of the things that people do all the time is have two different one sentence descriptions of what the business does on the same slide. And so it's like, and then they want to lead with the kind of technology angle or like the buzzword angle. So they'll try and put in AI or ML or blockchain when it was blockchain or whatever it might be. And then they've got a vision statement at the same time. And then you're like, oh, what are you trying to do? I mean, investors actually get put off with buzzwords. So they would rather, if you are building an AI product, they'd rather you talk about exactly what you're doing rather than just mention the fact that you use AI. There's also a bunch of other things that are annoying about this outside of it just being too much information. Like, we asked people whether they cared about the climate and they said yes. There's like kind of a so what element to that. Like, obviously people are going to say yes if you ask them that question. We're growing with charts, but like unrelated to anything, nothing on an X or Y axes. Like it's almost unreadable. Even things like our pitch deck 2024 or rights reserved, like that's another piece of information that you're asking them to look at. So they'll just be like, oh, I wonder why they put that in there. And then that's one of their 7 things that they're remembering is like the fact that you've got a disclaimer on the page. So you just need to think about exactly what you're communicating.
I could just chip in there very quickly.
Yeah.
Never, ever, ever use caps in sentences because it is actually practically harder to read. People read a lot slower, less than half the speed when they're reading caps. And this font is dreadful even in that context. So I don't think there's too much information personally on this slide. There's 50 words and it's, you've got to make a point somehow. But obviously the layout's terrible and the caps is a real problem.
Thank you. It's good feedback. There's going to be a lot of all caps in our slide deck, by the way.
I love an all caps.
Present company
I find
accepted.
so much easier to read, but I am an anomaly in that. Perdie always tells me to put things in lowercase, and I'm an all caps person.
But yeah, the thing is, like, some people have 25, 30 page slide decks, and their slide deck contains like 5 takeaways on every single slide. So then by the time you're asking people to remember 125 things, it's just impossible for the human brain to actually remember all of that information. So then you're at a disadvantage because you're not communicating something that people are actually going to remember.
Can I just jump in there? So one of the events that we do every year is investor founder speed dating, and for that we get usually above 200 applications. And I can just tell you, like, when you open up a pitch deck and see 25 slides, psychologically, it's like kind of a bit of an eye roll, and you just want to get through it as fast as possible because an investor, they either want to get to a no quickly or yes, I want to learn more quickly. And taking out 25 slides, it almost feels a bit like the ask to the person reading the deck is a lot because you're asking them to spend way more time on it than a deck or than a startup that can communicate what they're doing in like 13 slides, 14 slides. I would just highlight there, avoid doing anything over like 15 maybe 16 if that includes like the end slide and ask, but keep in mind what people psychologically think when they see how many slides you have in your deck.
Yeah. And then in your slide deck, so every slide, we've said this before during this program, but just write down the one key thing that you want the investor to walk away thinking. So the TLDR is, if there's too much text, there's too much information. And Guy Kawasaki's rule of thumb is that you should be able to fit everything that you want to say in 30-point font. So this is 30-point font. If your font is like size 11 because you're like putting all of these things everywhere, then that's probably too much information. So size 20, size 10 is just too small. So just keep it big, bold, as fewer words as possible.
Also, continuous prose. I love to read so much. It's my favorite thing to do, and I would not read this slide. Continuous prose does not work. Most founders, I'll say, like most founders know this and avoid this. We do sometimes see this, especially at the start of a deck when people want to like do an overview, but this kind of just kills the vibe right off the bat. If you start like this or end like this, people won't take the time to read it.
It also is, some investors have told us that it's almost a good place to start. So it's good practice to have a memo, and you write down in continuous prose everything that you want to say on a slide. So actually defining what your problem is in sentences is quite helpful for you as a bit of practice to be able to communicate what the problem is, but then that's not how you then show it off to the investor. So you might write down in a kind of memo style, this is my problem and this is the solution. And by articulating it or writing it down, you'll be able to figure out what the key points are. Then once you've written it down, you might circle around the words that are the most compelling words, or the parts of that, which are the parts that you then want to extract and put in the deck. So it's not bad in theory, but it's bad to be able to, it's not easy as an investor to be able to read information on that slide and be able to pick up what the key points are that are important. This is just a chat GPT talking about why continuous prose isn't important, isn't useful. So we suggest 11 slides that you have on your deck. Sometimes the 11 slides might turn into like 12, 13, 14, but that's because one of the 11 topics that you're going to talk about has 2 slides. This is what they are. Should we go into?
Yeah, we won't read through all of these because we're going to go into this in a bit more detail. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the slide titles that you're seeing. Obviously, you can deviate from this a little bit, and the slide count can fluctuate, 11, 12, 13, 14 slides, all fine. But this is just a good checklist to make sure you have this information included, and this information and not much more information is what you want to have in your deck.
We do have another presentation that says on every slide what the key takeaway should be from that slide, or how you articulate it. So on the problem slide, for example, how you actually articulate what the problem is and how you use data within that problem statement in order to kind of get the investors to feel like they trust you and your understanding of the problem. So if anybody wants that, we can send it around afterwards, but we don't want to spend too much time going into what's on the problem slide, what's on the solution slide, how to go through your TAM, because there's so much content on there. And I think most people will probably have a skeleton of a deck that looks a bit like this. I would just highlight that the one thing that is often missing is actually the business case. So people normally are good at articulating the problem that they're solving and their solution, often even the kind of total addressable market and the market opportunity, but the actual business model or how you're going to reach your customers is the bit that's often missing. So that might be pricing, or it might be literally how you're going to reach them. You're going to start with this particular market, and you're starting with that market for this reason, and you've got relationships already with people that you're selling to. Like all of that stuff is like how you're actually going to get it off the ground. That's the bit that's most commonly missing, as well as the competition, which people sometimes miss out as well for various different reasons. So do you want to go into this?
Just one question.
Yeah.
I think I know the answer, but I'll ask it. Do you ever, is there ever a scenario where you get the ask up front?
We've seen it. Yeah.
You don't
Yeah,
like it?
if you want to do a little overview slide after your title slide and say like 1 or 2 key traction metrics and then the ask at the very end, I think that's okay. I wouldn't say it's the most powerful way to start. I don't think, like, if you want to maximize the first 30 seconds you have to build an impression, I don't think it's going to do much in an investor's mind to get them interested. But it's not like you're shooting yourself in the foot, I think, if you start off by saying, I'm raising X amount.
I was talking to an investor the other day who loves it. She said that on the cover slide, she wants to know how much you're raising so she can listen to everything else with the lens of, okay, this is a 150K ask or a £1 million ask. Like there might be different expectations from what you're going to deliver next, and the 1 sentence description of what the product is. And then she also said she wanted to know about the founding team in the cover slide, which this is just her personal perspective, and all investors are going to be different. But like if it was 2 female founders, because she liked investing in female founders, if she knew that up front, so she'd be like, it's a female founder business, they're raising 150K and they're I don't know, in the medtech industry, and then she'd be like, okay, now I'm ready to like go into more detail. But yeah, it's one of the things, it's all personal, especially when you're talking to angels. Everybody has their own preferences.
Quick sort of observation on that. Would that information not be best sort of pulled out, if you were emailing someone in just your very simple sort of cover intro email? Because that's that's really kind of that feedback is really counter to all the sort of layouts that sort of we've learned about.
That I think the email that you send is so important, and having the key traction in the email, so you don't even have to read the deck. You're going to read the deck because of what the email says, probably. So some of the best emails will have, how much they're raising, link to the deck, key traction, or any key selling point. Might be the team, might be the traction, might be the market size or the opportunity that's being solved because it's the right time. But like whatever is that key takeaway.
I think most of this we're going to get into in greater detail later on. I would say the big point here to extract from everything that we have on the right-hand side is the narrative that you're going to be taking the listener on. And again, this is something that we're going to dive deeper in, but the sort of takeaways that you see, it's a lot about like the impression, the impression and the sort of like emotion that you want the investor to associate with you as a founder, and also like with your startup, especially like the latter bit, which is, wow, they're already doing it, this is a team I'd want to work with, this could be huge, right? It's generating a lot of excitement and interest.
Yeah, it's about how you're making people feel at this point, rather than about the actual words that you're saying. Edward, I can see you. Did you raise your hand?
Oh, thank you. Which out of this run of slides, what would you describe as the too long didn't read slide?
It depends on the startup, right? A lot of times I would say people get too in depth around the product and go so in detail about the features. And if you haven't established the context, even if you don't go too in depth about the features, if you really haven't established the context and the problem, when you go through a list of features, there's no way to associate any value with any of the features. So that first, maybe like, let's say 2 minutes of a pitch when you're doing the problems and the solution, it's kind of meaningless. I would also say how long you should spend on the problem depends on what you're trying to solve, right? If you're doing something that's in a niche, requires a lot of domain expertise to understand the severity and the significance of the problem, feel free to linger on that bit a little bit more because people want to understand it. If your problem is, let's say, like climate change, or fast fashion and its effect on climate change, something like that, where people can understand the problem easily, we see a lot of people wasting time, spending so much time talking about the problem, and you're like, okay, I got it. Like you could say 1 sentence about the problem and move on. It doesn't require more context than that. So I'd say those first few slides are particularly important to just know how much time you should spend on it. I'll say two things that are greatly overlooked and not spent enough time on is number one, the go-to-market strategy. Go-to-market strategy is really where you can separate yourself from your competition, because chances are an investor has seen pitches on the specific problem you're trying to solve or the specific solutions you're offering probably like a dozen plus times, especially like if you're in the property sector, right? We go over so many decks in the property sector. A go-to-market strategy is where you can show the investor like, hey, I have a unique understanding on the problem, or I have unique connections in this industry. It really shows the competitive advantage you have. And linger on that slide, super important. And then also traction slide. I know this is shocking, but so many startups or so many pitch decks we see do not talk about the traction enough. Like, you'd think this is the number one thing people want to highlight, and so often it's skipped over or people move through it quickly. And I would say even beyond that, a lot of people don't highlight their most impressive metrics. Like, it usually requires us digging a bit more to try to like suss out the traction metrics when we're speaking with a founder and going over the pitch deck. It's rarely initially highlighted on the deck. So those two are the ones I would suggest everyone could probably expand on more.
Guys, any suggestions on how to present that in like a pithy way, go-to-market slide? So like, for example, I mean, are you writing that out? Because obviously that can be quite hard to put on a slide in my head.
Yeah, it depends. It depends what your business model is. So if you're like a marketplace, for example, and you need to have a different go-to-market for both sides of the marketplace, how you communicate both those things at the same time, that's the business models that seem to struggle the most. But
Well,
yeah,
that's mine. So I'm sort of thinking, yeah, because it's a double-sider. So it's like, on the one hand, I've got brands that I'm speaking to, but then on the other hand, I've got consumers that I'm speaking to. So it's like maybe just a little bit of both, split the slide in half.
there are people that are also doing they're doing consumer and B2B at the same time.
Yeah.
And the advice is normally to lead more with the thing that you think is going to make you the most money. And then put that on the left-hand side, just because people read left to right. And so but you need to articulate it kind of in buckets, or kind of visually explain like who the segments are of customers, and then if you need to reach them in different ways, this is why you might need 2 slides rather than 1 for that same topic, because you're a marketplace and you just got 2 totally different sides of the business. But if with consumers they're all on TikTok, and you're going to use TikTok, but you need to prove that TikTok is the right way and that it's going to work, not like we're just going to spend some money on ads and hope for the best. Like, what research have you done to prove that this is the right way to reach those people? And then with B2B, like, are you going to go via partnerships? Are you going to kind of do a cold outreach? If so, again, what proof do you have that the model that you're going to use is going to work to the best of your ability? Obviously, like, some of the stuff you're going to have to iterate and trial, but can you ask someone for a referral? Have you worked in the industry before? And therefore you know that the job role that you're targeting is this persona, and you know what their budgets are. Like, just any validation that route to market is the most likely to work out of all of the things that we've done.
Thank you.
The two slides that I'm sure you've all heard this before are like, investors think are bullshit, but you have to put them in anyway, are the Tam Sam Som slide and the competition slide. But just because they might flick through them and not really pay any attention, because they know that it's just like numbers that you've found / potentially made up. And obviously with your competition slide, you're going to be all of the ticks, and your competitors are not going to have all of the ticks. You can't not put them in for that reason. They still want to see that you've got a TAM, and the TAM is like at least $1 billion, has to have a B in it, especially if you're pitching VCs. And with your competition, that you are aware of where you sit in the market and how you can add your competitive advantage. So there's a lot of skepticism around the slides, but equally you're going to have to put them in anyway.
I just saw a question about forecasts. We'll touch on that by the end of the presentation. A few points.
Yeah, you
go ahead.
No, I was just going to read what it says in the slide anyway.
Just going to say a few points to remember. have one clear takeaway from each slide. An investor that we are practicing our pitch with gave us a really good bit of feedback, which is if the investor is looking at your deck, you should basically give them absolutely no option but to have one takeaway that you decide from looking at the slide. So it's like, it's so easy to have so many different takeaways from a slide, but if a well-designed slide should give people no option but to leave the slide with one specific thing in mind. It's that crystal clear. It's salient. Second, make sure it's clear your company. Yes, you'd think this is very obvious. Sometimes it's not, especially if you're a company that has, we see some people who trade under a different name or who the product that they're pitching has a different name than the company name. If you're in that bucket, just make sure the name's crystal clear. And then finally, branding. So I've heard from a few people who have got pitch deck feedback so far that they're like, why am I getting deck feedback about my design? I just want to hear about the content. It's because the design honestly matters. If you're looking through a lot of the decks, as any investor is, it's so obvious who's put time into designing a deck and who hasn't. And it shows a lot more than just branding, right? If you're a D2C company or B2C company, you're probably already know your branding matters. You've probably invested time into designing a beautiful brand that communicates your values. If you haven't, you can do so with tools like Canva pretty easily. But for those of you who are B2B companies and think, hey, this isn't that important for me, it is. It really is, because it shows your attention to detail. It shows that you want to deliver people something that looks aesthetically pleasing. And finally, like if you just use a Google Slides, like the white slide pitch deck, it just looks like you aren't aware of tools like Canva or what a deck should look like, because this information is shared everywhere that you can design a deck inexpensively and make it look nice, and it looks like you just haven't put in the effort to do so.
Yeah, agreed. And then I think the other hardest point to nail is when you're over explaining something, and this especially applies to the problem. Investors think that you don't really know what the problem is that you're trying to solve. And so the clearer you can articulate it in the least amount of words, the more investors are like, they've got it. They know exactly what the problem is that they're solving. So if you think about a way to communicate what your problem is in like one sentence, what would that one sentence be to not only make investors understand that you really understand what it is, but also to make investors feel the pain?
Financial forecasts. So as you probably notice on the slide overview of titles we said you should include, we did not include financial forecast, product roadmap. Financial forecast, if you want to, you could include it in an appendix like attached to an email that you send to investors. That's okay. I wouldn't say you need to go, like you don't need to send people the type of financial forecast that you would include in a data room. If you want to show projections on where you'll be in the next 2 to 3 years, just to give them an idea on how big you can get, include that in an appendix, just not in the deck. It causes people to ask questions that you want to have them ask as a follow-up question, or that should be coming up in like meeting 2 with the deck, right? You're just trying to get to that next meeting, or if you send this call, you're trying to get a meeting, so you don't need to over-explain. Product roadmap, I would say this really depends on what you're building. It's something you can include. Where I think it's useful to include a product roadmap is if you have a big vision for your company and where you are for the first 18 months it's not clear how that links with the bigger vision. Like, for example, with us and our pitch deck, right? The first 18 months for our company has been building out a virtual accelerator, which is very different from where we see us being in the next 3 to 5 years. So in our case, for our pitch deck, it was actually pretty useful to say like, hey, we started off with the mission of X, Y, and Z. And in order to do so, we need to complete the following steps. And that way that actually makes a lot of sense in the narrative of, I guess, like kind of like the timeline for the different features. So it can be useful to use then. But it's something that, use at your own discernment, basically.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to get into the narrative. So as well as only being able to remember 7 things in our working memory, as humans, we're also more likely to connect with stories more than cold hard facts and figures, which means you need to find a way to tell the story of your business and the business model and the problem and the solution that you're solving in a way that investors are going to remember. And people that can do this well are incredibly good. And you know, like people that pitch all the time, if you've seen Steve Jobs pitching something, they're incredible at this. They obviously get a lot of coaching like constantly, but we'll try and go through some of the headlines, and it's just a good skill to practice. So this is a story arc. Everyone will know it because every book or movie or TV show that you've ever watched follows the same arc. I'm sure everybody's heard that there's only 7 plots in every single story that exists, and your job is to turn your business and your business model and how you're communicating it into the narrative. And the simple way to do it is via the story arc. So the story arc involves 3 different things: context, conflict, and a conclusion. So the context is where this story is taking place. So that might be who's involved in the story, how they're currently operating in the world, the market conditions, that kind of thing in your business. So you always start with your hero. There's a hero of every story, and the hero is not you. Like as the startup, you're not the hero. Your customer is the hero in all situations. So you start with your customer and the problem that your customer is currently facing, and maybe a little bit about how they're currently dealing with the problem. And that is your problem slide. That's why you often see case studies, or when someone's talking about a problem, they'll be like, this is Sally. Sally has this problem, and they're using a human because our brains can connect with that human story. And if you want someone to really feel the pain, then telling someone else how another human feels the pain, like provides that empathy. So you start with your hero and the problem that they're solving, how it can't be fixed with the current available tools. And then typically your hero is looking for other solutions. And then whilst they're searching for other solutions, they find your product. Your product is obviously the perfect solution for them. It turns out that your hero isn't alone, so there are many more heroes like them. And your job as a startup is to get all of those heroes to have to be using your product. And then your original hero is happy. That's kind of like the start, the problem that they're solving, your solution. You're going to reach them, but not only them, you're also going to reach everybody else like them and give them this product so that they're happy. They might continue to be part of the story because they might then have another problem that then your product is solving. So this is if you've got a bunch of different features, or you've got new versions of the product, or other things. So they might continue with you after that. If you get this story down and it's quite simple, it just helps the investor or whoever you're pitching to connect with what it is that you're saying.
Elements of the arc to remember, I would say the main thing that these 4 bullet points are indicating is like context is critical. So when you're talking about your customers, for example, understand when you talk about like their pain points, again, it's like why their pain points matter, what impact do the pain points have on the day-to-day life, even if it's like a B2B customer, you can still, that's still relevant. Conflict, again, this is like why the problem matters, not just the pain points that the customer has, but why they matter. So context matters there. Setting, that bit is clear, self-explanatory, I think. And then resolution, why the solution. This is something I think is easily missed. Why the solution solves the problem. That link needs to be crystal clear. Again, that requires a bit of context.
So we're going to see it in action across the slides that you need on your deck, so you understand how to turn it into the story. So you've got your slides. The beginning is all about context setting and introducing the characters, which is, you know, the customer, your hero, and yourself. You introduce the conflict, obviously, with the problem slide. You really get investors to feel the pain. Like one of the things that investors get a lot is like this, so what? Like why should I care? Like, And so making them really feel it's sometimes quite challenging, but really powerful when you can do it. Then you add clarity on the market conditions within the business model and the go-to-market slide, and sometimes with the competition. And then another thing that people do is they don't like close the loop on the story. So at the end of the pitch, you then take them back to the customer and the pain that they were solving right at the end, and you close off the story for them. So you go to your, when you just go like, ask, I'm raising 250K to get 1,000 customers and spend it all on my team. If you then end that sentence with, and make the world a happier place to work, or whatever it was that you were addressing in the first place, like you're asking for the money to solve that initial problem. So you can kind of close the loop on the story in the ask as well.
So the questions that investors are going to be thinking kind of before the should I invest or not is the why should I care, should I believe you, and should I join you. So it's getting people's interests, then getting the sort of like confidence and their belief, and then finally getting them to want to commit. By the way, I see some great questions coming in. We'll get to the end of the presentation. We might take a few as we go, but we'll get to the end of the presentation and make sure they're all answered.
Oh yeah, let me know, because I haven't got the questions up because I'm on screen share, so I can't see anything. Yeah. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the introduction slide. We just mentioned it at the beginning when I was talking about that other investor as well, but you've only got 11 slides. And so it's actually a really valuable piece of real estate that people don't use, especially because it's the very first slide that any investor is actually going to see when they open your deck. And so one big mistake that we see people make a lot is that they just got like pitch deck in huge font. Like, that's such a waste. Like, you could be talking about the business, like what you're actually doing, or like getting people excited. So like pitch deck 2024, or even your business name, pitch deck 2024, like don't use the space to state the obvious. They know that they're looking at pitch deck. Instead, use it to get their interest as soon as you possibly can. The best way to do that is to use like a hook one-liner, and that one-liner to be really visionary. So there's a lot of people that we see their one-liner and it's like what they do. So it'll be like a SaaS marketplace app doing XYZ thing. Like, they don't need to know that amount of detail at the beginning. They need to know the output of what your business is going to get them. So what is the output of what your business gets? So if you do have a marketplace, what is the customer in your ideal situation? Where are they going to be because they used your product? That's the vision. And that's what you should have in your first slide of your deck. One thing that founders struggle with quite a lot is when especially if you're pitching at pre-seed or seed, you need to both talk about your long-term vision, but you also need to talk about the step one that you're on now. So the pitch deck is actually for where you want to get before you fundraise again, but the vision should be where you want to be kind of at the end of the road. So this is the place where you talk about the overall vision and where the business might be in 10 years. And then the whole rest of the deck is, and here's the first 2 to 3 years. Like, this is step one, and here's how I'm going to get there. So if you need to communicate long-term overall goals at the same time as like short-term actionable, how you're going to get there, that's a good differentiator to do it. So we've got some examples. This is yeah, go ahead.
Go for it.
No, I was just going to say, this is N26. You can see like the thinking that you might have. I mean, feel free to put anything else in the chat that you think stands out here, but they've got a bold visionary statement. You know that it's going to be a fintech product because it talks about banking, but they're still only using 4 words. But it's visionary because it's talking about the future. You've obviously got a screen grab, so you know that there's a product at this point, or some kind of version of a product. Anything else that you want to point out on this one?
Nope. For Uber, again, you'll see next generation car service, visionary. You'll also see phones. Remember, this is back in like, what was it? I don't know, 2008, 2010. So people were not associating phones with driving services, essentially. So that also paints a picture of the fact, or like it reaffirms that it is a next generation company. one thing to keep in mind in this slide and also the following few slides is that these are screenshots of adverts that were, or pitch decks that were used in like 2010, right? So it's with 2010 tools. So don't think, oh wow, this is just a boring white slide. I can use a boring white slide too. No, this was pre-Canva. So we hold them to a different standard.
They've also managed to do it in 4 words, which one of them is hyphenated. And they used to be called Uber Cab, which helps. So you're like, okay, it's a cab service, but you can use your phone. Like, it gives you an idea of what the pitch deck is about to be. We can go through some examples. If people can drill theirs down to 4 words, then let us know. So Dropbox is the next one, moving the world's files. Again, they've got it down in 4 words. Again, it's quite visionary. It's not talking about how they're doing it at this point. They're just talking about the vision. You have an idea that it's going to be about, you know, like files or filing. So you kind of have an indication of where you're going. Again, the design isn't great, but this is because it's well-recognized brands and they were pitching this like 15 years ago.
Automating healthcare delivery, right? Also pretty self-explanatory. It gives you an indication of what they do without getting into too much detail. And it's like big enough that it gets people excited too, because like you want the balance of like clarity or direction and vision.
And last one is Airbnb. So book rooms with locals rather than hotels. Again, this was at the time when people weren't doing this kind of, like, you book a hotel on a hotel booking website, you don't go to people's houses. So it's intriguing, it piques your interest, you have an idea because it's got B&B in the name, and then it's about booking rooms. But other than that, it doesn't talk about how you do it, but you're interested to learn how. So that's just some tips. And yeah, we'd love to kind of go through some of your one-liners with you.
One thing I just want to touch on too is, again, most of these are from like 10 plus years ago. Now that certain markets are more crowded, if you are in a more crowded market, please make sure your one-liner indicates how you're different. If the one-liner is the same as other companies in that space, it kind of puts you on the back foot already.
Yeah.
So go. Sorry, Perdie, did you
No,
want to say?
no,
Okay, I was just going to say, so use the intro slide to answer both what the big and urgent problem is that you're solving and how you came across this problem and why it's important for you to solve. And you might be thinking, well, this is like several things I need to touch on. And I thought that I was supposed to only have one clear takeaway from the slide. So this is where narrative comes into play, right? So for the intro, like intro/problem, I think the most powerful problem slides are usually when people start with a personal story, because that shows, that usually highlights the problem, how you came upon it, its negative impacts on the user. It ticks a lot of those boxes. And it's just kind of nice to start off with a story because can easily visualize that. It's kind of like a way to ease yourself into the deck that feels very natural. So it'd be like, back in 2018, I was going through X, Y, and Z. It was really difficult because 1, 2, and 3, there was no solutions I could find. So like blah, 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 right? That's a nice way. Or if it's not a personal problem, you can start the narrative with, imagine you're going through blah, 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 and it's causing you blah, blah, blah problems, right? That's really nice way to go through the problem. Or you can do it numerically as well, and you can be pulling in big numbers to get people to easily visualize like how significant the problem is. If you're pulling in numbers, the numbers that I think are incredibly powerful are things that indicate that, like, that almost sort of measure the pain point or measure the lost opportunity. If you're doing something that either that can generate people revenue or save them money, make sure those numbers are quantified early on. Like, the problem is so big and it costs the industry X, Y, and Z, not having a solution for it, right? That's a great way to tick these boxes pretty easily.
Yeah, I think some people find it a bit awkward, especially when you're nervous and you're in a pitch and then you're like pulling up your deck. Let's say you're doing it on Zoom and then you're on the title slide and you just got to start talking. It's like, how do you then start talking? So if you're just like, hi, great to meet you, I'm really excited to talk to you more about about my business, my name is blah, and like I'm so passionate about this for this reason, like I see this. It's just like kind of gets you into the flow before you even move to the problem slide. And I think people, when they're nervous, when they're on that intro slide, they just click straight, like you don't even see the intro slide, they'll just like click straight onto the problem slide and then like start talking about the problem, whereas you could do a bit of scene setting before that, and it kind of might help you relieve your nerves and get the ball rolling on building a relationship. So we wanted to talk a bit about traction dipping. So we mentioned that there's a traction slide, and we'd always recommend that you have a traction slide. But one of the things that people can make mistakes with is that the traction slide often isn't until the end. And so they don't talk about what they've done to date until they get to that slide. So almost it sounds like just a theoretical concept until you've made it to that slide, like, oh, we're solving this problem and we're going to solve it in this way and we're going to sell it to these people and we're different from those people for this reason. And then they'll get to that slide and they'll be like, oh, by the way, we've already done it. We've already got 1,000 customers. And we've already generated £1 million worth of revenue. And you're like, if you would have told me that at the beginning, then it wouldn't have seemed like it was like a theoretical idea. It would have seemed like a real business that you're already running. And I would have paid a lot more attention to it. So there's some people that put their traction slide as slide 1, for example, because they know that's their big, strongest thing. And then you'll listen to them much more intently because you're listening through the lens of someone who's made £1 million in revenue for this business already. And so you can use traction dipping in this way.
Here are some ways that you can integrate traction dipping into your deck. So when you're talking about the problem, it's a great way to easily weave in. And we talked to X number of customers who said that this was the biggest problem that they're having at work, or that not having a solution costs them X number of hours per week, right? You can just slide that in very naturally. For the solution and market opportunity bit, that's a great way to weave in your early adopters or having LOIs or free users. Especially with your solution too, if you want to talk about how your solution is the proper solution to the problem, you can talk about, and in our live beta, our 50 users have shown that already they've saved X number of hours, right? That's a great little traction dipping soundbite to weave in there. And then with the business market and go-to-market strategy, at what you want, you can say what evidence supports this strategy will be effective. I think a good format for even a good framework to think about the go-to-market strategy, how you display this on the slide, that can be up to you, but think about like, what are the goals of your go-to-market strategy specifically, not just like get more users or build brand awareness, but like think about the tangible goals and think about the strategy you want to use to get there and the actual like action item. So the action items might be like build up, your social media platform, blah, blah, blah. But if you just put on, if you just put on your deck, like our go-to-market strategy is LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, and use influencers, that's something that people can copy and paste. Like your competition could easily copy and paste that same slide, and it'd be relevant for everyone, right? So it doesn't show anything unique about you. If you work in the go-to strategy about how it fits into like the bigger framework and your strategy behind it, that's where you can show that that's where you can differentiate yourself. And that's also where you can show like, hey, part of our go-to-market strategy is to build a social media channel, and we already have X number of followers, or we've already built a community of this size, right? Feel free to brag a little bit on the go-to-market strategy if it fits.
And you can then mention it again in the traction slide, like if this is the thing that's really going to build investors' trust. So if you mention it on slide 1, you can mention it again on slide 10, because it's just going to reinforce that traction. The other thing that we haven't mentioned here, but is good to know, is if you as the team could be considered traction. So especially when like, you're selling a med tech product or a health tech product, and you've got doctors on the team, or people that really have first-hand experience of the problem, like you're selling into the NHS and they used to be like a buyer in the NHS and that's one of your co-founders. And again, you wait until the team slide to mention that. Like that should be something that you're mentioning right up front. So it's when you're setting the scene about the the problem, or you're on the initial intro slide, you can say, myself and my co-founder, like, we're both doctors, we both worked at the NHS for 15 years, and we saw this problem firsthand. And that's another example of traction dipping. Don't wait until you're on the team slide to talk about how great the team is, if that's one of your biggest assets. So
and please make sure that the numbers that you're using are consistent. There's so many times where metrics that people use contradict itself, or like it's clear that like probably one of the numbers that you use at the start of the deck about revenue, maybe that number has been updated and then the number on the traction slide hasn't, or vice versa. Make sure everything's consistent.
Yeah. Another few tips: use title slides to your advantage. So rather than having problem, solution, market opportunity, you can actually, rather than writing that out, actually use a statement there. So rather than saying problem, you can say 20 million users aren't currently being served in this way, and then you talk about why they're not being served in that way, and that's the problem. And then you can say, and we're changing that with blah blah blah, and then that's your solution. You don't have to say what the title is for every slide in order to tell the story in the most convincing way. And a good example of this would be the drop paper test. So if you sent your deck to an investor and then they printed it out and dropped it on the floor, do you reckon they could actually put it all back together in the right order? Now, they probably could if you said problem, solution, market size, but can you create a consistent narrative that means that they will be able to have that story and be able to piece it together well, because you've done it so well with the title slides, and it just makes so much sense with how you're telling it. People have said before that you can put page numbers on, but that's cheating. They should be able to do it without page numbers.
So if you are not doing if you're not just sending the deck and you're doing a like more kind of like a sit down conversation, it can feel a little unnatural in a conversation if someone can just tell that you're going through like slide by slide, right? You want to be able to kind of jump around a little bit and make sure it flows in a conversation. I see some questions that kind of touch on this. So if you are, but you want to jump to the next slide?
Yeah, if you're at a pitch event, or I don't know, you're not expecting to be pitching, so you haven't got your deck to hand, or you're having a coffee or something like that, and someone says, so tell me about your business, and you can't be like, you can't like go through your deck in the same way, because it will look like not that personable. You can kind of weave these three conversations or these three topics into the conversation, and it will get you to the point where you're then able to pitch. And then we're kind of talking about how the investors will be perceiving what it is that you're saying. So if you start talking to them and you're like, we've built Hotbed, and it's this accelerator, and the reason we've built it is because we really want everyone around the world to get access to the quality education that people manage to get via YC, and it's just not available to them. And so 2.5 years ago, that's what we started doing. And since then, we've managed to support X amount of people, and we've got to this point, this point, this point, this point. And the reason why we started doing it is because 5 years ago, before we even started Hotbed, we were working together in a team. Like, you can kind of tell the story and get investors to understand how you see the world and how like in love you are with the problem, because you need to really, really be passionate about the problem that you're solving, because you're going to be working on it for so many years to come. And they kind of understand your personality and your background and like your opinion of yourself. And so if you talk about the problem that you're solving and how much you care about it, and then how you've come to this point where you're now actually building a business to solve the problem, it's just a good way to kind of get them to feel something. And be more interested in then like having a follow-up meeting with you, or receiving your actual pitch via email, or whatever it might be from there.
And lastly, I'm sure you're all familiar with this. People won't remember what you say, but they'll remember how you made them feel. So the investor's not going to remember the details of the deck, but they will remember whether or not they're excited by what you're doing and intrigued or bored. Please bear that in mind. Some really good questions. Perdie's going to have to run in a few. And as I mentioned, my internet is not the most stable today. So Perdie, do you have to dash now, or do you have 2 minutes? Either way, I'll stay on and try to get through some of these questions. But do you need
the last thing that I was going to say is have have empathy for the investor as well. I know
Yeah.
that people often don't, and like investors are in a different position, and they position themselves as being more powerful, but at the end of the day, you're asking them to give you quite a substantial amount of money, and especially with angels, it's their own money that you're asking them for. If you just went like down the pub and said to someone, hey, can you give me 50 grand, and they said, why am I going to give you 50 grand? The answer is not because I need 50 grand in order to build my business. The answer is because I'm going to do something for you with that 50 grand. Like what's in it for them is that they're going to see the upside, because it's going to be such a big business that they're going to make money. That's the most important thing. They are going to make more money from giving you this 50 grand than they're going to make in any other alternative asset class, like investing in property or investing in stocks. And then even within just investing in startups, they have to believe that giving it to you versus one of your competitors or somewhere in a different space, or even like a Monzo or Revolut or something, like that's where they're going to make money. And then secondary to that is you're solving a problem that they want to support as well. So if they've got like a social mission, or that they care about the fintech industry, then that's secondary. But just always remember that you're actually asking an investor for quite a lot when you're asking them to part with 10K, 50K, 100K, 150K, whatever it might be. And so just remember that when you're going through. Yeah, I need to disappear.
Okay, I'll stay on and go through some questions. I'm going to try to get through a few in the chat, and then Adam, I'll jump to you. So Edward asked, thoughts on short knockout video, 45 seconds, that clearly explains a new product that you've built and its traction. I love the video. You might not get everyone who views it, but I think attaching a little Loom video is great. In the outreach email, if you include a video, I would say, and here's a 45-second explanation. Some people send videos that are like 15 minutes. So if it's nice, short, and snappy, yeah, include that with a link. And yeah, I think overall received quite well. What about forecast? There's another question in here that says, the comments on financials are interesting. Is it not one of the slides that investors think is BS, but want to see that you've had the discipline to have done or thought about? Will investors not push back hard on this not being included? No. So on the deck, it's not expected that you're going to go into extreme detail about the financials. You can always say too, we have our financial forecast prepared, happy to get in a call and go over them with you so you can show you had it done. You do need to have your financial forecast done when you're going to pitch. So if investors do ask about it, you don't have to like spend the next week scrambling and trying to get that prepared. It is time intensive. Make sure you have that prepared. And also, you're ready to talk about it, but you don't need to, it won't be expected to go through that or have that included on the pitch deck. Should you not include potential big numbers in business model slide? So I think this is where having a big number on your total addressable market is a must. Again, if your TAM starts with an M and not a B, even though we all know TAM, SAM, SOM, like you can get those numbers to say anything that you want. Having it say something in the millions is not going to tick the boxes of many investors. But if you're talking specifically in terms of revenue, if you say, I guess the way that this would probably be communicated is saying like, hey, and in year 3 or year 4, year 5, we expect to be generating X number or like X million. Investors know those are forecasts, and again, something that you can get to say anything. I think if you want to indicate that you're chasing a big market, if it's not something that is obvious off the bat, what's helpful here to say, like what gets investors' attention is talking about either big acquisitions or big funding rounds in the space. So if you have like a why now slide, you can include, or even a competitor slide, you can talk about large funding rounds that have just taken place in this space. Adam, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, so mine's a question over a tactic. So we get asked a lot of the same questions over and over again. They're not really questions I feel are suitable for the pitch deck. So do you advise on having a supplementary page that says, frequently asked questions? Or I also think that sometimes people think they're asking a dumb question, but because it's everybody asking it, they don't know that it's not a dumb question. It's just a repeatable question, which has a really simple answer, but it's just not quite pitch deck worthy. I mean, any supplement documents, any techniques, tactics?
Yeah. Can I just ask what type of questions?
I think the one that we get asked predominantly is how do people feel about having their pictures taken? So we
Okay.
have really good answers to that. but it's pretty common. And I also think there's another way of progressing the project. So we've got what we do right now, and it's hard enough just saying, here's our early stage version of what we want to go on to build, and you've seen that in action. There's another 2 or 3 ways which we could grow the company, but I think what we're really concentrating on is this the right way to approach the market? If we get this bit right, then everything is possible.
Okay. So first off, I do think having an FAQ page is great. Even if you end up answering the question and the investor doesn't even look at the FAQ page, the fact that you can just send them an FAQ document and be like, here's some questions you might have, here's the answer. I think that indicates that you're like a really prepared founder. I would also divide the questions that you're getting in from investors after the pitch to, is this a question that's coming from like a bit of pushback? Or is it an investor who's excited? Now, you want the questions where you can see the investor is intrigued, interested, and they want to learn more, or a question of, hey, well, what about this problem? Or have you thought about this? Or like, I don't think it'll work because of X, Y, and Z. If it's that, and that's coming up a lot, what I would do is when you're giving the pitch at the right time, say, okay, you can be like, okay, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, doesn't everyone hate getting their picture taken? Well, actually, we found that X, Y, and Z, right? It shows that they're not alone in having that. They're not alone in having that concern, and it also indicates to the investor, like, hey, this founder is already thinking about potential pain points. They already have proven solutions. Blah blah blah. You don't want to sound like you're like over explaining yourself, and even if you have a well thought out comeback to a question or a bit of negative feedback, you know you're going to get. And unfortunately, sometimes it just comes off like you're pushing back to the investor, even if it's like a really reasonable comeback. They just kind of get that feeling of, oh, this founder like isn't listening to the critique I have. So avoid doing that if it's something that comes up a lot, and just get it answered and taken care of in the pitch deck. Okay, next question. From John, is there a distinction to be made between decks for live pitches and decks for circulating to investors? Personal stories feel like they work live, but I've struggled to put them succinctly onto a slide for circulation. First person feels like it works less well then. Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you. I think personal stories, great to talk through, way more difficult to communicate on a deck. The one example would maybe be around something that's like medical related, because people will probably know about the problem. And I actually think that's where having it be a personal story kind of gives you a competitive advantage. But only do that in situations where I think people already understand the gravity and the size of the problem. If not, yeah, I completely agree. It kind of gets personal stories kind of get lost on decks when you can't communicate it. James asked, yeah, about using slides to say something versus using them to just say like the boring title of the slide. Totally agree with you. One thing that Angan actually shared with us on our pitch deck is he basically went through every single word that we used on our pitch deck, whether it was the title or subtext, literally every single word, and was like, do you have to include this word? Do you have to include this word? Do you have to include this word? And it's really useful and slightly painful, but a worthwhile exercise. Okay, Cal asks, most startups fail, so not sure about saying I'm going to make you a lot of money. Yeah, this shouldn't be something that you explicitly say, but this should be an answer that investors walk away from your pitch with, or walk away from the conversation. They should think, okay, the path to me having a large exit is X, Y, and Z, and I believe the founder is on that path. Hopefully all investors know investing in startups comes with a lot of risks, and definitely don't say, if you invest, I'm going to make you like 50x in the next 2 years, unless you want a problem with like the FCA. Do we get allocated pitching spots, or do we ask who to pitch to? I think this is a question for Wednesday. If so, it's first come, first serve. Next question. How much of this full pitch deck should we be able to cover in 3 minutes? Great question. It is so tricky to do a pitch deck in 3 minutes, but really worthwhile exercise, because most conversations that you're going to be having when you first meet people, unless you already have secured a pitch meeting, are probably going to just be a couple minutes. So have a pitch deck, make sure there aren't many words on it, and aim to go through pretty much everything in this 3 minutes. I would say the slides that you can easily skip over are like your competition slide. Business model, you want to touch on it, but if it's like a SaaS subscription, don't go into more detail than like it's a SaaS subscription and we charge X, Y, and Z, right? Like those are slides that people waste time on that you can probably cut down to like 5 seconds. So just know what slides to linger more on. Okay, any other questions? Okay, fabulous. I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Reach out if you have any questions in the meantime. Submit your weekly updates if you haven't. And yeah, other than that, bye.